Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. It may be Friday the 13th, but it is in fact your lucky day because we have one of the most fascinating guests in America. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Casey Means. Now, this book has been out for a couple of months, but I confess I had not heard about it until my pal Tucker Carlson had Casey Means on his show. And then I listened almost with bated breath to the interview. I could not believe some of the things I was hearing. Some I had heard before, but they were expanded on in very easy to digest ways. And by the way, speaking of Tucker Carlson, I was with him last night in Kansas City, Missouri, and we had just a chat on this sort of open tour he's doing with a bunch of folks across several cities, and it was super fun. I think he'll be dropping that as a podcast today, if memory serves. But I'll just want to say before we get started, what a great way for two ex-cable newsers, right? Ex-TV newsers to get back together on our own terms as independent broadcasters and be able to talk about anything. Totally liberating. It's just more validation that I'm in the right lane, and I think you guys know that. And to those of you who actually spent money and got in cars and got in planes and got yourselves to Kansas City last night to listen, thank you so much. That takes a lot of effort, and I was very touched by the big turnout. And it was wonderful to meet some of the people who listen to and watch this show every day in person, and to hug you and to hold each other depending on the level of emotionality, and it did vary, and shake hands and hear what motivates you in your own life, what you care about. So thank you. Thanks to all of you, whether you were there or not. I appreciate you listening to the show. Okay, so I love you so much that I'm going to extend your life today. I literally feel like Casey Means has extended my life. This book, Good Energy, you can see it's got all my highlights on it. It's pretty, isn't it? It's got a nice cover, Good Energy. And I also listen to the audiobook because, that's how I consume most of my books these days. And that other interview with Tucker that I just mentioned. And now today we're going to expand on some of the things I learned, which I will help short form, so we can move things along and get to some very practical advice. That's my hope, that you can walk away today saying, maybe I can't do all 20 things, right? But maybe I can do 5. And these small changes can make all the difference in your life. And 5 is a start. In a year, maybe you will have done 10. And in 2 years, maybe you will have done 20. But let's get it started, because Casey Means, along with her brother Callie, have been sounding the alarm for us all about America's health crisis. They're really kind of responsible for the Make America Healthy Again movement, spearheaded by RFKJ. Callie has been advising RFKJ, and Casey is his brilliant surgeon sister, who is author of this New York Times bestseller, Good Energy: The Surprising Connection Between Metabolism and Limitless Health. And she joins me for the full show today. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. Do you owe back taxes or have unfiled returns? Along with hiring tens of thousands of new agents and field officers, the IRS has been sending over 5 million pay-up letters to those who have unfiled tax returns or balances owed. Do not waive your rights and speak with them on your own. Why would you? Instead, Tax Network USA, a trusted tax relief firm, has saved more than $1 billion in back taxes for their clients, and they might be able to help secure you the best deal possible and kind of take some of this stress off of you. Whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, they can help you. Whether it's business or personal taxes, even if you have the means to pay, or if you're on a fixed income, they can help you. Finally, resolve your tax burdens once and for all. Call these guys at 1-800-958-1000. 1-800-958-1000, or just go to tnusa.com/Megyn. Don't let the IRS control your life. Empower yourself with Tax Network USA's support and take charge of your financial future. Visit tnusa.com/Megyn today. Casey, welcome to the show.
Megyn, thank you.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, me too. I have so much I want to ask you. So let's get folks up to speed who haven't heard the interview that I refer to or haven't read the book, because, Good Energy, they may be like, well, what is that, like vibes? Because they're sick of vibes at this point in this election cycle. It's not vibes.
So when we're talking about good energy, we are talking about the very foundational way that our bodies work. We're talking about metabolic health, a word that fortunately we're hearing more about these days, but we're talking about how our cells power themselves, which might be something that people have never thought about before. And yet, metabolic dysfunction is the root cause of nearly every chronic disease torturing American lives today, from childhood all the way into our elderly years. So it's a term we've got to get familiar with. And the reason I wrote this book is because I had trained in the conventional healthcare system. I'd done what every good medical student does, rise the ranks of that academic ladder, went to Stanford Medical School, did 5 years of head and neck surgery training. And at the end of that training, before launching out into being a private practice or academic attending physician, I looked around me at what was happening in American health more broadly and realized that even though, I'm working hard in my lane as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, more broadly, American health is just getting destroyed. It's getting destroyed. Chronic illness is exploding across the lifespan. And that's not something that I really learned about in medical school. I didn't learn about, why are these diseases going up? What are the factors that have changed recently in human history that are making us have this explosion of chronic disease? And that's a journey that I needed to go on before really launching out. And when I did that, what I found was that when you look at the science through the lens of root causes, not just the symptoms we're treating, not just the drugs that we need, to prescribe to all of these different ailments that we have, when we look at root causes, what we find is that nearly every chronic disease torturing American lives today is rooted in metabolic dysfunction. And that is an issue with how our bodies literally power themselves. So that's what I'm talking about with good energy. When our cells make good energy, i.e. have good metabolic health, so many of the conditions that are plaguing us can improve. And so that needs to be the central focus of our American healthcare system. And right now it is the intentional blind spot of the American healthcare system. And so that's what this book is all about.
And so it covers a lot. It covers the biggest thing is food and what we're, and that seems to be the biggest driver of cellular health. But it covers some exercise too, and it covers environmental toxins and things that we may be putting on our bodies and so on. So it's got the full panoply of things that will affect your cells and how you can improve. That's why I say if people, feel overwhelmed, they can pick and choose and just get started. But I think the food being such a huge influencer is empowering, because if you're not yet an exerciser, just start thinking about the food. If you don't want to think about your shampoo and your makeup and your carpet and all, then just start with the thing that you're most actively involved in, because everybody's putting food in their mouth every day. And these critical changes can genuinely extend lifespan and improve health along the way.
That's exactly right. The unique thing about this moment in time that we're living right now is that our world has radically changed, just exponential rate of change over the past 100 or so years, with industrialization and urbanization and technological advancement. But from a cells perspective, we have, 40 trillion cells in our body. The world is very different than what it's been expecting through all of human history. And so what's really happening with our health being destroyed right now in our country is that there is a severe mismatch between what our cells need to thrive and work properly and what our environment looks like right now. And that's across lots of different domains. It's across, of course, food, which I believe is really that number one domain that we've got to, get back to the basics, because that's really that's the 2 to 3 pounds of molecular information that we put in our mouth every day to tell our cells basically what to be built from and how to function. But we're also talking about sleep habits. We're talking about the fact that we are sleeping 20% less than we were 100 years ago, our emotional health, the fact that we have low-grade chronic stress all the time now from these devices in our hands 24 hours a day that, are streaming fear-inducing sensationalist, news stories from all around the world straight to our eyeballs when we're at the dinner table and when we're in our beds. We're talking about the sedentary behavior, the fact that Americans are literally sitting 80% of the day. We're the only bipedal upright mammals, and yet we choose to lock ourselves in a chair for 80% of the day, just squandering the miraculous gift of being able to move. We're talking about the environmental toxins. We're talking about the 80,000 plus synthetic toxins that have entered our food, water, air, and homes over the past 100 years by industry, virtually unregulated, many of which are destroying our cellular health. We're talking about our relationship with light, the fact that ever since the incandescent light bulb was invented just a couple hundred years ago, and now at the advent of blue light emitting technology, we're literally blasting our retinas with artificial light all the time. And this is totally destroying our circadian biology and our core foundational cellular health. So these are some of the things that we're dealing with as a body, as a group of cells that make up our body, that's looking for information from the environment and not getting the signals it needs to function. So what the chronic disease epidemic really represents is this just sheer and utter confusion of our bodies with the signals that it's getting from all around us. And getting back to food, this is the one that, I mean, each of these pillars that I'm speaking about has a profound impact on our core cellular health and metabolic health. But food, we have to realize we eat somewhere between 40 and 70 metric tons of food in our lifetime. And this is not just calories. This is not just energy. This is the building blocks, the atomic molecular building blocks of our cells. And what people don't really realize is that our cells are actually constantly turning over throughout our lifetime, even though, we kind of look the same day to day. I'm kind of going to look pretty similar tomorrow that I do today. Actually, hundreds of billions of cells are dying and being reborn, and they are 3D printing themselves out of food. Isn't that incredible? We don't think about the body that way as a process. So we've got to give the body good information every single day and pay that bill of healthy, good food every day, because we're constantly changing over our body. Our gut lining, our entire skin cells completely turns over every few weeks. So we've got to constantly be feeding the body with good information. Right now, 70% of our calories are coming from ultra-processed, industrially manufactured, frankenfood, ultra-processed foods, devoid of nutrients, filled with toxic additives, a modern invention created by food scientists in the past 50 years that now make up the majority of our calories. Of course, we're sick. We are eating 70% of that molecular information that builds our body from essentially garbage that does not have what our cells need to function. So that's why food is so important. But the second piece is also that food is what tells our genes and our cell signaling pathways what to do. We think of our genes as our destiny. It's not true. Our genes are a blueprint, and how those genes interact with the environment is what our outcomes are. And food is one of those key things that changes our genetic expression. I'll give you a simple example that I talk about in the book. You look at a herb like turmeric. It has thousands of molecular compounds in it that the earth and that the soil has made for us to help our genes and our cell signaling function properly. And one of those is curcumin. Curcumin actually goes into our cells. It binds to proteins within the cells and changes the expression, decreases the expression of our key inflammatory pathway, which is called NF-kappa B. So you're eating this food and you're actually turning the knob down on an inflammatory pathway that drives disease. And we could talk about any natural food in this way, filled with thousands of chemical compounds, natural from the earth, from God, to help us live our highest purpose life. And we, instead of using that precious gift with real unprocessed food from good soil that's filled with nutrients, we have decided that food is nothing more than calories. And it doesn't matter if we eat nutrient devoid ultra-processed food from a factory for 70% of their calories. Well, this is a science experiment that has failed. Americans are just absolutely getting astronomically ill, and food is a key piece of that. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of systems issues that lead to why we have become enamored with ultra-processed foods, because of so many incentives at the level of the farm bill and at the level of how media is funded that essentially make us believe that ultra-processed foods are fine and normal when in fact they are not.
Well, I am old enough to have lived through the moment in time when the messaging changed from what's bad for you is sugary foods and fatty foods are fine to fat is the problem, sugar is the solution. They took all the fat out of the foods. To make them taste better, they put all the sugar in. And then we got hooked on this. We got hooked on these sugary foods. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, I guess 20 years ago, that I actually thought a healthy snack would be one of those packs of Snackwell cookies. My God, the shame. But But I'm not alone. This I know. But one of the illuminating points of the book is that I thought that, and many others think this way, because we've been led to believe, we've been defrauded by virtually every person in charge of every industry that touches the food that arrives in our kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the unfortunate part that I think people really do need to understand, because people do actually listen to the science. You know, we do listen to doctors in this country. When the USDA food pyramid said eat 6 to 11 servings of grains and cereals per day, we did it. We got very sick, but we did it. When Fauci said get the jab, the majority of Americans did it. You know, we do listen to doctors, but unfortunately, at the highest level of our medical institutions, there are conflicts of interest and corruption that are actually making the science that we're getting not as accurate, not as clean as we'd want it to be. So you look at some examples. NIH, taxpayer-funded institution that we would ostensibly believe is its sole interest is to keep Americans healthy. But 80% of NIH researchers have a conflict of interest with industry, so are getting paid also by processed food industry, pharmaceutical industry. There was a report that came out that 8,000 NIH-funded researchers have a major conflict of interest with industry. So we would assume that would just be clean money from the NIH, from taxpayers, with a singular goal of American health. But in fact, it ends up becoming a PR arm to do scientific research that's mostly focused on pharmaceutical interventions and our standard conventional model of care, which is very reactive and very sick care and not focused on root causes. Then you go to the USDA.
So just to jump in on that, Casey, jump in on that. So basically you're saying with the FDA or the NIH, the people who are looking at our food and what's okay and what's not okay, suffer from the same conflict as the FDA did in Dope Sick, as evidenced by that movie, where the opioid industry got going because the people who were deciding whether that could be safe and marketed as non-addictive or, you know, whatever the initial disclaimers were, they're on the take. They either are getting money from these drug companies, or in the case of the food industry, these big food manufacturers, or they're banking on joining those companies immediately after their government stint is over.
Right. I mean, you see this all the time with the revolving door between, you know, FDA commissioner and then pharmaceutical company right after they finish. Got Gottlieb, FDA, straight to Pfizer. It's just back and forth.
Right.
But it's across every single industry. So NIH, we've got 8,000 major conflicts of interest in researchers. FDA, we've got 75% of the FDA's drug budget coming from pharma, not taxpayers. USDA, we've got 95% of the people who made the USDA food guidelines for America, which come out every 5 years, so from 2000 to 2025, had major conflicts of interest with the processed food industry. You look at medical schools. You've got medical schools receiving huge multi-million-dollar grants from pharmaceutical companies. When I was at Stanford Medical School received a $3 million grant from Pfizer for curriculum reform. So we've got NIH, USDA, FDA, medical schools, all taking money. And then you add on the professional organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American Diabetes Association, which work to create the guidelines that doctors practice by, and that doctors actually, if they step out of line of what the clinical practice guidelines are, they're at risk for liability. And then these professional organizations are getting a majority of their budget from industry. You've got the American Academy of Pediatrics getting money from Abbott and from Mead Johnson and from vaccine manufacturers. These are the organizations that write the guidelines. So then it's no surprise that you look at the recent American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines for treatment of childhood obesity, and all of a sudden what crops up is that they're recommending as first-line treatment for childhood obesity GLP-1 agonist injections, weekly injections for kids, Ozempic. And so you just look at every single layer of our government agencies, how doctors are taught, and who's making the guidelines. And the money is astronomical, what's going in from industry. And that's, of course, going to cloud the way research is done and how we even think about health in the body. So I, as a medical student, and all my peers who go into medical school to with this very noble intent to help people and to improve children's health, improve American health. We go to these elite institutions with just wanting to work our butts off. What happens? You enter a curriculum where the science is conflicted. The science that you're seeing at its most foundational level has conflict of interest, where the school has been funded by pharmaceutical industry. The medical school is not getting funded by Big Kale or Big Exercise. They're being funded by Big Pharma, and where the guidelines that you have to learn and memorize and practice by also have a conflict of interest. So what you get is all these doctors who, you start medical school around age 21, 22. You're young, and you're deeply trusting of this system, right? But what you see is that the body is 100 separate parts. You see that what your path is going to be is to go through 4 years of medical school and then pick one of 100 different surgical or medical subspecialties that you're going to focus on just one little part of the body. You see that really what a disease is a collection of, symptoms and signs, and you don't really think about disease until it gets to that place. And then you just need to, figure out what the symptoms are, label the disease, and prescribe a medication or do a surgery. You don't think about proactive health. You don't think about root cause health. You don't think about environmental factors, because that's not what being taught. And then you go into your practice and you're getting pressure from everyone around you, from the administrative staff, the bureaucrats, and the billers, to basically see as many patients as you possibly can, because you are paid by volume, which further insidiously pushes you to not think about root causes, how to really reverse or prevent disease, because that takes a long time, right? That takes long conversations with the patient. What's easier, what's faster, is to see the patient, label their signs and symptoms as a disease, and then give them a drug or send them for surgery. That's what's fast. And since we have this system, this incentive structure in American healthcare that's focused on volume, how many patients can I see per week? The outcomes is not really the thing that we're focused on. So you're taking these incredible, great, bright young minds and putting them to a system that at every level has conflicts that's pushing us to see the body as a collection of separate parts that's inevitable to get disease, and that your job as a doctor is to label that disease and give it a pill or a surgery. And that unfortunately is where we're at, and why doctors, even with the best intentions, are not focused on root causes. There's no incentive to do so, and there's little education.
I think about it sometimes with respect to the very, very wealthy people I know. I'm talking billionaire wealthy. I don't know that many of them, but I know some. And they all live into their 90s. Now, how do they do that? It's because they have an individual doctor who's on staff or constantly available to them. I mean, take the most extreme case, Queen Elizabeth, right? How did she live to 93? Her entire life, she was probably eating clean. She had people around her monitoring things like her blood glucose just to make sure she was where she needed to be on all these things. Full-time attention and care. I think about my old boss at Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, same thing. He's like in his mid-90s, he's had falls and things like that, but onward he trudges. And then I've known younger people who are with the B on the money front, and they travel for business, and I'll see them on a business trip, and they'll have their own food that they've brought with them. And I've asked more than one of these guys, like, why are you bringing your own food? We're at this beautiful event. Like, I'm sure they're going to feed us. No, because they know if they put themselves in the care of just some random chef in some random place, they're not going to get the right beef. One guy I knew, multi-billionaire, one of the richest Americans we have, has his own cows that are butchered on his own ranch, and that's the beef he travels. It's just like there is a level of eating and wellness that the average person has no idea about. But you don't actually have to be a billionaire to get it. You just have to have the information truly in this book, Good Energy, by Dr. Casey Means, and listen to the life changes you can bring on for yourself.
Megyn, it's true. I also see this as well in a community of people who have awoken to this idea that the reasons we're sick in America, the reasons that life expectancy right now is going down in America, and a child born today is on track to live 600 days less than someone who is age 40 right now. Like, this is astronomical. We spend almost 2x more than any other high-income country in the world on healthcare. We also spend 23% of the largest GDP in the world on quote unquote healthcare. And we're not even able to keep life expectancy stable. It's going down in our country. If that doesn't kind of rip you out of your slumber, I don't know what will. And so it's not for a lack of medication, right? We're prescribing medications just more and more. The more statins we prescribe, the more heart disease we're getting. The more Ozempic we're prescribing, the more obesity rates are going up. The more SSRIs we're prescribing, the more people have depression. You know, it's not correlating with the amount of drugs. So there's something else going on that's insidious, that's environmental. And like you say, people who are aware of what's going on are doing essentially everything they can to protect their bodies from the normal inputs that you are going to be exposed to if you're just living in America today. All of these visible
Can I just say, I'm so annoyed listening to this because I know you guys are tight with RFKJ. And I know Callie, this is an interesting piece of your story. Callie's your brother. And I've been following him for years on Twitter and watching him and listening to his expertise as well. But I know he's connected with RFKJ and helped him come up with MAHA and that, you know, you guys have been doing some input there. But here's what's so infuriating. RFKJ has been raising some of these issues for a long time. He's an environmental lawyer. He's an environmental lawyer at heart. That's how he actually made his living. And Casey, no sooner did he pop up and say, like, I don't know about these vaccines. Forget COVID vaccine. Long before that, we're pumping these babies through with a lot of shots at a very early age, and they don't really need this stuff. And then his warnings went well beyond vaccines. He came on this show a couple years ago and said, you know, where do all the ticks come from? Why is autism shooting up? Like all these things. And nobody would platform him at all. They decided he was part of the so-called disinformation dozen. That was the Biden White House. He was totally silenced on raising the alarm on a lot of these same issues because there really are. And you sound like a conspiracy theorist when you're like, the powerful forces are silencing him. No, they actually were, because they really do have financial skin in keeping him and probably you and Callie quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this all comes back to money, unfortunately. And when you realize that around 60% of mainstream media's advertising funding is coming from the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, you can't watch 5 minutes of commercials on TV without seeing a medication commercial. And you realize that the funny thing is that these companies that are paying that much to have the ad spots on mainstream media, they're not actually really trying to advertise to you, the consumer. They're trying to get a direct line of communication to the media companies so that they can have an impact on the message that goes out that makes our news. That's a key point, is that it's not about getting you to talk to your doctor about Ozempic. It's about having a direct line of communication to the media network so they can have more control over what is said and who is platformed. And this is why the emergence of independent media is one of the most disruptive and exactly what you're doing, right? It's the most disruptive and powerful force right now in the world, because what you see is that when you look at independent media that are getting hundreds of millions of downloads per month, what are they talking about? Root cause health. The dietary and lifestyle factors like getting sunshine and taking supplements and eating real food and regenerative agriculture. This is what's being talked about on independent media when we're not in a chokehold from the advertisers to talk about a specific dogmatic narrative about that pharmaceuticals are the only way to be healthy. And so I think that's very, very heartening. And, you know, I think we're in a really interesting moment right now where post-COVID, which was just the probably the worst public policy disaster in human history, where COVID was really fundamentally a metabolic disease. People, we died at much higher rates than other countries that had better metabolic health. This virus went after people who were immunocompromised because of metabolic disease. This is why people with comorbidities were dying of COVID, and people who were otherwise healthy really weren't, and children were dying at much lower rates. And people saw that despite knowing that from month 2, month 3 of the pandemic, that this was a virus that went after people who were compromised from lifestyle-related and food-related diseases, metabolic disease, that zero airtime and zero information coming from our federal agencies in charge for health had anything to do with improving our metabolic health, I think it created a crack where people realize that there's a bigger problem here. So just to get back to what you were saying about RFK, I think there's a moment right now where there's been some distrust that has been bred in the agencies and the healthcare system. Also, costs are going up for everything with inflation. And right now, our healthcare costs, our premiums in the United States are astronomical. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical costs. So people are feeling it in a new, different, and poignant way. And I think we're also seeing this inflection point with how health even got worse after COVID due to the lockdowns and other factors. Kids are really suffering. We've got 34% of kids with a behavioral, mental, or emotional disorder. We've got 1 in 36 kids in the United States with autism, 1 in 22 in California. We've got ADHD skyrocketing. We've got young adult cancer skyrocketing. We've got prediabetes in teens reaching 30%. We've got 52% of children overweight or obese. So there's a confluence of factors, I think, that are happening that are making this the moment where this is finally making it to the mainstream, which is really, really exciting. But this is why the concept of freedom of speech and what Elon's talking about and what RFK is talking about and this idea of all the gaslighting that's happening around misinformation from the social media companies, X excluded, and mainstream media. This is why that issue is actually so important and why that issue needs to be thought about in lockstep with the healthcare crisis. Because if we start silencing the people who are able to use the disruption of independent media to get these messages out, that's when we're screwed. People say, are you hopeful? And I say, I am hopeful because this is able to be talked about in our beautiful country where we can have discourse. But if that gets threatened, then I think it becomes a much scarier place.
To me, it's not totally dissimilar from, just to bring it to the current news cycle, what's happened in the past few days after the debate. It was placed in the hands of the mainstream media. We had fake news fact checks on statements that were absolutely true by Donald Trump. Kamala Harris was allowed to get away with lie after lie with no fact checks, no interruptions, no follow-ups. And the internet melted down after watching it because we knew in our guts it was wrong. It was unfair. We knew. And so we've had 3 days now of fact checkers all over the internet, citizen journalists, independent journalists firing off tweet after tweet on X, showing the video of Kamala Harris's positions, which she denied, showing the FBI stats on crime are false that were cited by David Muir, things like that. And so this independent voice, this collective of the voices to make one strong counterbalance voice, is correcting the record and changing the national conversation and the national knowledge and maybe even the national vote. And the same thing is now happening in healthcare, which is far more important. This is about whether we live or die. This is about whether our children live or die and for how long and how well. Yeah. And you really are at the pointy head of the spear on this issue. And thank God now your message is getting out. And I know Tucker talked to you about this and you mentioned at the top, but your credentials could not be any more stellar. Casey, our audience already knows this, but I mean, to say she's not fringy is just an insult to even say that anybody might consider that about you. You were at the top of every single medical thing you ever touched until you grew really disillusioned with the system and walked away voluntarily. Stanford, top of your class, top resident, on your way, you were a fifth year of residency. They begged you not to leave. You didn't want to go. You had done everything right. And then you realized you'd been sold a bag of goods.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's going on here. It really doesn't. And I appreciate that. But I mean, it's really just about looking at the completely unemotional facts and stepping back for 1 second to ask why. I think that's what Americans are doing right now. And, just to list a little bit about what I'm talking about here, because we obviously talked about this on Tucker, but I think it's worth just zeroing in on what I mean by American health getting destroyed. Because then it becomes more why isn't every doctor stopping and truly pausing their practice to get together to figure this out? We have 74% of American adults with overweight or obesity. 74%. 3/4 of Americans have overweight or obesity. We've got 40% of children with obesity or overweight. We've got 52% of American adults with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. This should be close to zero. It's 52% with an overt metabolic disorder. 30% of teens now have prediabetes. 50 years ago, a pediatrician might have gone their entire career without seeing a single case of prediabetes in a teen. Now it's 30%. We've got, again, 1 in 22 kids in California with autism. This is astronomically higher than it was 20, 30 years ago when it was 1 in 150 and then 1 in 1,500 farther back. We have, again, 34% of young adults with a mental health or emotional health issue. Young adult cancers are up 79%. We are on track to have 2 million new cases of cancer in the United States this year. Highest absolute number ever recorded in human history. Autoimmune diseases are skyrocketing, especially in women of middle age, by some reports going up 3 to 12% per year. Infertility is going up 1% per year. Sperm counts are going down 1% per year at a sustained rate since the 1970s. 77% of American young adults are not fit to serve in the military because of these chronic health issues. We've got 18% of teens with fatty liver disease. Again, pediatricians would have never seen this 50 years ago. And as I mentioned, life expectancy is actually going down in the wealthiest country in the world. So ignore credentials, ignore Stanford, ignore all of it. Look at those facts, all of which are referenced on my website for all the people who want to know. Our health is getting destroyed. And at the best institutions in America, the hospitals, the medical schools, we're not talking about why. We're talking about how to medicate these conditions. We're talking about how to operate more on these conditions. We're talking about how to increase access to the healthcare system that is not improving these. We've got to be talking about these. The fact that this was not a topic on the debate stage is an abomination of our media. Yeah. Why is this not the first order thing being talked about? That children have, close to 50% of children in America have a chronic disease. What is going on? We should be outraged. We are spending more on this problem in a way that is not fixing the problem than almost any other line item in the American budget. Taxpayers are paying for it, and it's not being talked about. So everyone really needs to realize that this is not a fringe issue. It is not something that, it's just an accident that we're ignoring. We are actively ignoring this at every level of our government agencies and media, and that needs to stop immediately.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to take up, I'll take a quick break, but we're going to talk about 3 of the demons: sugar, ultra-processed foods, and foods that you think are healthy, but which are covered in pesticides. You get your big leafy lettuce salad, and you dive right in without worrying about whether it's organic or not, and you may be doing far more harm than good. We're going to pick it up with a specific food discussion, and then we'll move on to some of the other toxins that are around us and ways to clean our bodies and our lives right after this. Casey stays with us for the full show. Again, the book is Good Energy by Casey Means, MD. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. The app shows whether you're burning fat or carbs and provides tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and stress management. You breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and then based on your measurements, Lumen will give you a personalized nutrition plan for the day. You can also breathe into it right before or after your workouts and your meals to get real-time insights. Your metabolism, as we've been discussing, is your body's engine. It's how it turns food into fuel. Optimal metabolic health translates to numerous benefits we've been discussing it all show, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, and so on. Lumen can also track your cycle, adjusting its recommendations to maintain a healthy metabolism through hormonal shifts. If you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Megyn to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Megyn for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so Casey, I did the tease before the break. That's a very short form summary of what you're recommending on the health front, but put in your own words in terms of the massive overhauls to eating that are required.
at the highest level, we need to move away from ultra processed foods and start eating real foods, unprocessed foods that are grown in good soil, ideally local, and not covered in the toxic invisible pesticides that are literally covering 99% of the foods we're eating in the United States. So it's a move away from this factory-made food back to natural food. That's number one. I mean, when we get more specific in there, we want to be eating foods that actually support our cellular and our metabolic health so that allow our cells to have the molecules they need to function properly. Because right now, all the chronic diseases that I talked about, they are all rooted in the exact same thing, which is dysfunctional cellular biology, largely rooted in this issue of metabolic dysfunction that can be very much improved by giving cells the nutrients they need from food to function properly. So in the book, I talk about really 5 things that we should try to look for in food, and include in almost every meal. And I call them the 5 elements of good energy eating. And this is making sure that in most of our meals, we have a fiber source, we have an omega-3 source, we have a probiotic source, a really healthy protein source, and some source of really good antioxidants and micronutrients. So what this does is it boils, there's a lot of components of food that we want to get, but if you are focusing on getting those 5 things in most meals and knowing a few foods in each of those categories that you like and stocking your kitchen with them, you can put together a meal that is going to have a really good chance of supporting your cellular biology. So for me, what I do is I just have my mental checklist of foods that are rich in fiber that I can keep in my house. So this would be like black beans and chickpeas and legumes and hemp seeds. If I'm thinking about omega-3s, I'm going to always have some wild-caught salmon in my fridge, maybe some canned sardines, canned mackerel, things like that. For healthy protein, I've got a freezer full of game meats and grass-fed meats that I can just defrost and easily make a meal with. And then for probiotics, I've got my sauerkraut and my kimchi and my beet kvass and my Greek yogurt and things like that. So if you just have a mental checklist of a few things from each category that you enjoy, eating for health becomes as simple as kind of piecing together a meal that has these components. So that's just sort of really high level. When we think about grocery store shopping, I'm not going to say that every packaged food in the grocery store is a problem because everything exists on a continuum of processing. One of my favorite foods is like flackers, something like that. And that's just literally organic flax seeds, apple cider vinegar, and spices. It comes in a bag. It was made in a factory, but it's really a simple, whole organic food in that bag. Compare that to something like a Twinkie or a Pop-Tart, where there is a list of 40 ingredients, things that, you've never heard of before. I mean, you see on these packaged foods, things like polysorbate 80 and maltodextrin and red 40. We don't know where those things come from. We can't visualize them. Those are things that we should avoid. So just really being clear about, what is going into my body. And I think at the highest level, this just comes down to backing up and building a new relationship with food and really not just really understanding it for what it actually is, which is this miraculous substance that comes from the ground by the ground interacting with sunlight through plants and through photosynthesis, and that we get to take into our body to really determine our mental health, our physical health, our longevity, our mood, our thoughts. I mean, food is making really everything. And so we should both be, I think, in awe of what food can do for us. We should really respect that it is just this incredible process that happens on Earth as really a gift for us to be able to use to reach our highest purpose. And we should invest a lot more time and money in our lives and in our families in prioritizing the highest quality food we can, because high quality food will lead to a high quality life. And Americans spend a fraction of a percentage of their total income on food as compared to European families who are much healthier than us. And so it's just, I think a lot of it, a mindset shift towards remembering what food is and that there's an alchemical reaction between our cells and food that really determines our health outcomes, and having more respect for the whole process and having more respect for our bodies, realizing that our bodies are truly miracles. Each of our lives is a miracle. And one of the ways that we can honor this incredible experience of being able to have this life and be here on this beautiful planet, for, no discernible reason. Like, it's just such a gift and a joy that we get to be here. One of the ways we can honor that miracle and this opportunity of life is to eat, unpoisoned, unprocessed, fresh food from farmers that we know. And so I just tell people, like, if there's an opportunity to get your family out to the farmer's market once a week, talk to farmers, look people in the eye who are growing the food, because that food is going to become your body. It's going to become your thoughts. It's going to become
think about
who you
that.
are.
That food is going to become your body. Oh my gosh, that's so well put. That brings it home. Keep going.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I think we need to just wake up from the slumber that has been indoctrinated into us, that these foods that are so devoid of life. You think about, there's some really interesting actually studies on this, where if you take food straight out of your garden, or food that was picked by a farmer that day, and so it's farm fresh, and you eat it, it's filled with things like vitamin C and antioxidants and polyphenols and all these things that are going to support our health. But the average piece of food travels 1,500 miles now from the soil to our plate. And every day that food is out of the soil, it is one more day that it has been dead. And as something is more dead, so more disconnected from the life source, which is the soil and the water and the sunlight that kept it alive, there's going to be a degradation of nutrients. So food...
It's like your Christmas tree. Think about what happens to your Christmas tree over the 10 days it's standing there.
Dying. So we are eating not only in the grocery store, food that's in the grocery store may have been out of the soil for 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's traveled in a refrigerated van, or a truck, hundreds, if not thousands of miles, or flown from Chile or Mexico to your plate, just dying, losing nutrients. How do we expect to be vital and to have longevity if the food we are eating is more dead than it has ever been in history? Then you take that fresh food and you put it in a factory and you process it and you strip it of all of its helpful nutrients, and then you put chemical preservatives in it to make it essentially be shelf stable. What do we think that's going to do to our biology when we are eating something that is so devoid of life? So these types of reframes I mentioned just because we are so disconnected from nature. 150 years ago, 97% of Americans grew some of their own food. Now it's less than 3%. So we are just so disconnected from this miracle. And I think part of the reckoning and the awakening to reverse the chronic disease epidemic, and also get back on top of, I think, this darkness that a lot of us feel in culture and society today, this just sense of emptiness and darkness that's kind of taking over. I think part of it is going to actually just be getting closer in touch with our food and with the soil and with this beautiful, miraculous dance that happens between the environment and our bodies every day to create the lives that we want, and investing more in that.
We'll take a break in 2 minutes. So I'm going to start a discussion that we won't possibly finish before the break. But this is where organic comes in, right? Because I had friends 15 years ago, and they actually ghost wrote a book on organic foods. And their conclusion was the only thing that you really need to make sure is organic when you do your grocery shopping is strawberries. Other than that, it's not really worth it. This is not good information. And you're sounding a very different alarm. So would you say that if it's a fruit or a vegetable, if it comes out of the earth, either from the actual earth or from a tree, et cetera, it has to be organic?
So I know we have to go to break, but I think my short answer would be it is absolutely beneficial for it to be organic. And we need to be implementing the precautionary principle when we think about organic or non-organic food, which is that even though the data may be muddied in large part because the industries that make these pesticides like Bayer and Monsanto have a huge interest in making us confused about whether they're safe. We know that a lot of these pesticides are linked to cancer, autoimmune disease, behavioral issues, endocrine disruption and hormone disruption. And so for me, thinking about the fact that 6 billion pounds of synthetic pesticides are sprayed in our food system every year, and chronic disease rates are skyrocketing, and there's mechanistic evidence of why, I certainly feel that it is important to choose foods that don't have those toxic substances on them.
Yeah. And then when you get those foods home, those organic foods, do you have some special washing technique for them?
I personally, I just do a quick rinse of my food, but that's because I'm actually now buying food from all farmers that I know.
Yeah.
So when I go to the farmer's market, I am getting it from the Apricot Lane Farm stand. I have been to Apricot Lane Farms. I know Molly Chester, who runs that farm. I get my meat from White Oak Pastures. I know Will Harris, who owns White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. I get my
See,
meat
this
from
is so
Primal
much
Pastures.
easier if you.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. No, so he's in Georgia because you're in Oregon, aren't you?
I'm in California, but you can
Oh,
get these things shipped
wait.
now. And
Hold that thought. That's a good tease.
Okay.
I'm going to take my break. We're picking it up right there. This is where we're getting down to brass tacks. How exactly should we eat and how do we get the good food? The book is called Good Energy. One Texan doctor with 0 Big Pharma ties is sharing a breakthrough medical discovery, and it's about taking charge of your health. No flashy big promises. This guy's focused on results. He says a unique protein can strengthen your bones, ease joint discomfort, minimize wrinkles, and improve digestion, all by working in harmony with nature and your body's God-given resilience. No chemicals, no weird additives, or scary side effects. And some users are reporting significant improvements in just 2 weeks. This Texan doctor is giving you up to 45% off this protein at nativepath.sale/MK. With thousands already experiencing the benefits and over 4 million jars sold, this is not a trend. It is a commitment to genuine well-being. And here's the best part. Every order is backed by a 365-day money-back guarantee because your satisfaction matters. Want to embrace a healthier, more vibrant you with stronger bones and more mobility well into your golden years? Consider checking out nativepath.sale/MK now to claim your exclusive discount of up to 45% off. Hungryroot is one very easy way to eat healthy. They send you fresh, high-quality groceries, simple, delicious recipes, and essential supplements. It's like having someone else do all the planning and shopping so you don't even have to think about it. Hungryroot gets to know your personal health goals, your dietary restrictions, favorite foods, how much time you want to spend cooking, and more. Then they will build you a personalized cart for the week, including easy 4-ingredient recipes to put those groceries to use. Each order fully customizable. They've got fresh produce, high-quality meat, healthy snacks, and more. Everything from Hungryroot follows a simple standard. It has to taste good, be quick to make, and contain whole, trusted ingredients. Hungryroot is offering the Megyn Kelly Show viewers 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/Megyn, M-E-G-Y-N, to get 40% off your first delivery and get your free veggies. hungryroot.com/Megyn. Don't forget to use our link so they know we sent you. Casey, we were talking about what specifically, like how do you get your beef? Because I will tell you, like a frustration of mine here in Connecticut, and you would think in Connecticut, there'd be farms everywhere. There really aren't. It's very hard to find a farmer's market or actually glad hand with an actual farmer. So you're limited to the Whole Foods, but the Whole Foods is really not that great. It's not exactly whole. So you were giving us some options on, like, for people like me who don't have, a farmer down the road.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to meat, there are some great frozen options today. Freezing is actually a great way to preserve nutrients in both fresh produce and also in meats. If foods are frozen right at the time of harvesting or slaughter, they retain more nutrients than if they are just left at ambient temperature. So, now there's a lot of great services that you can order regenerative, grass-fed, organic meat from around the country and have it shipped to you. Force of Nature is a great brand that, is in Whole Foods. And like I mentioned, ordering from a regenerative farm like White Oak Pastures, and many others. It's a great option today now that we're able to ship. And then I would say for people who are trying to find organic produce, if you don't have anything fresh near you, that's where I think getting a lot of, frozen produce like from Costco or places like that, or even Walmart has quite a bit of organic selection today. Those are good options. Farmers market is ideal because if you're speaking to the farmer and that food was harvested recently, it's likely going to have the highest nutrient composition because it's traveled less. And so that's ideal if you can. And, really just making it a family event. This should be something we do with our families. We should get kids talking to farmers interested in food early. And so, Googling, trying to find a farmer's market near you, and then walking around and just speaking to the people growing your food and learn how it's done. I mean, this is really something we need to get back in touch with. Yeah. Fortunately, I live in Southern California, so we have some great produce year round. But yeah. So, well, there's a few options. I mean, certainly, again, frozen food. Buying some of the dry staples in bulk, like something like beans and legumes and nuts and seeds, and those things are less perishable. There's and then I think frozen companies, there's like Daily Harvest, which can get you organic frozen food direct to your home. And then I would also say there's actually some really unique options you can do, like growing your own food indoors. I have a product called a lettuce grow in my house, which is a vertical indoor farming system. Yeah, and we're growing food all the time in our kitchen.
Wait, go on. How much room does this take? Tell me everything. I did once interview Elon Musk's brother, who is doing this kind of thing. He's big into indoor farming. So I know a little bit, but keep going to explain this.
Yeah. I mean, compared to like regenerative agriculture in the soil, it's different, because you're not growing it in like the ground. You're growing it in a vertical farming tower. So mine has 36 slots, and you stick a little sprout in each slot. And over the course of 1 to 2 months, you get a gigantic head of lettuce, a gigantic head of cauliflower, broccoli, tomatoes, herbs. And so you can actually grow these indoor year round. So when I lived in Bend, Oregon, and it was snowy for 4 or 5 months a year, I was actually growing all sorts of produce in my kitchen and in my office. And it basically cycles water through a tower and can grow it with very, very little energy. So unfortunately, the price point of these are still a little bit high, but I think it's amazing how much it gets you back in touch with the miracle of how food is grown. And it's kind of like a gateway. Growing a little bit of your own food, even if it's herbs, is almost like a gateway drug to getting to be more inspired by sourcing of food.
100%. I mean, I know that even from my own lame little garden at the beach, where we just did the typical cucumbers and tomatoes. But suddenly it was like, oh, wow, our own food. It had no pesticides on it. It was grown right outside of our home. It tasted delicious. And we did notice the difference. The pesticides, Dr. Mark Sisson, he's not a doctor, Mark Sisson.
Yes.
He's behind Primal Kitchen brand, which is amazing. And I know you must love. He said on the show, he's very leery now of fruits and vegetables. He's very worried about the number of pesticides on your average fruit and vegetable. And he's very, I don't know if he's full paleo on, all the meats and so on, but he was leaning that direction more and more. What are your thoughts on that? Because you do have some interesting conclusions on diet and like the various diets that are out there and so on.
Yeah. I think that we do need to have a bigger conversation about pesticides in this country, because it's just so unchecked. When we think about the companies that are making pesticides in the US, we are buying a lot of these chemicals straight from China and straight from Germany.
Oh, God.
And two American companies, one of the largest merger ever in Germany was the merger of Bayer and Monsanto. So a pharmaceutical company and agrochemical company that are now teaming up. And what's so devastatingly, I don't even want to use that word ironic, because it trivializes how serious this is. But, Bayer Monsanto, Bayer makes pharmaceuticals to treat non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and glyphosate, which is made by Monsanto, has strong links and mechanistic links to the development of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So you think about how dark that is, that it's almost like a revolving door between a merger of a company that creates a product that's virtually unregulated in our country, that leads to cancer, and then has merged with a company that creates a treatment for that cancer. So that's the type of darkness that we're seeing in the pesticide industry. And, Chem China, that makes a huge amount of the pesticides we buy, we're just funneling billions of dollars towards China to basically sell us chemicals that are invisibly poisoning our food. And these pesticides, if you look at the scientific links to diseases, we know that pesticides are linked to ADHD, to thyroid disease, to sperm dysfunction, female infertility, male infertility, cancer, autism, liver disease. The list goes on and on, and that they actually poison the part of our cell that does mitochondrial or metabolic activity, which is the mitochondria. People remember from high school biology, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's the key part of the cell that's involved in metabolic health, and it is damaged by pesticides, of which 99% of American foods are grown non-organically, so are using these synthetic pesticides, which have a link wildly to Nazi Germany, who was developing organophosphate pesticides as part of their war effort to increase yields to feed German soldiers. And so it's just a very, very dark link. There's been a lot of corruption in that data. The Monsanto papers was this scandal that came out years ago about Monsanto essentially, working to silence the data and massage the data that said that pesticides are safe. And then you look at how this sort of, how this is happening on the systemic level. Well, we have a farm bill that's renewed every 5 years, and this is a $500 billion plus bill that is used to help support farmers with crop insurance and subsidies for commodity crop growth. But unfortunately, what this $500 billion bill does is it funds the commodity crops that are turned to ultra-processed foods. So corn, wheat, soy, sugar beets, things like that, which then become the cheapest possible commodities on the market because taxpayers have funded the subsidies, which then gives a cheap, basically raw material to all the ultra-processed food companies to then turn into these ultra-processed garbage foods that are built on the backbone of commodity crops. Then they add in toxic colorings and natural flavors and dough conditioners and preservatives to make it taste like food, but really it's built on this bland, taxpayer-funded, pesticide-covered commodity crop through our farm bill. So at the policy level, this is how it gets on our plates. And this is why the unhealthy food is cheaper, because taxpayers are paying for it to be subsidized to be cheaper. And then taxpayers are paying for the environmental externalities from this destructive type of agriculture and for the healthcare costs of Americans who are getting sick because of this food. So we're paying 4 times over for the unhealthy food that is making us sick. And the devastating part, because it's not necessarily, the farmers who are responsible for our health. It's the doctors who are there to help us on our health. But this is the part that's devastating, is that there's a devil's bargain that exists right now between ultra-processed food, who wants to make food as cheap and addictive as possible, so we'll buy more, and the healthcare industry that financially benefits off more patients being sick with chronic illnesses and needing treatment over longer periods of time. You would think that doctors would be in the front of the line to be studying what pesticides and plastics and microplastics and artificial colorings and preservatives in our food are doing to our chronic illness. But have you ever heard someone in the Fauci realm getting up and talking about these things on a microphone saying we have to investigate our food supply? No. It's someone like RFKJ who's then being silenced for talking about these things and being called a fringe lunatic for bringing these things up. And so There's something very dark and backwards around the incentives between these two of the largest industries in the country that unfortunately, and this is an unemotional statement of fact, benefit from more Americans being addicted to taxpayer-subsidized ultra-processed foods filled with toxic additives and a healthcare industry that benefits from more patients having chronic disease over a longer period of time.
That brings me to seed oils, which I really want to discuss. But before I get there, I want to just say the conclusion that I reached from reading the book on the number of diets, the kinds of diets, whether it's keto or paleo or Mediterranean. And what I think, you correct me if I'm wrong about your conclusion, because I've been reading a lot of you, so I may have confused it, but I think you reached basically the same conclusion that Peter Attia reached and that he espoused on our show, which was, he said he's come to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter which one of those you choose, that you shouldn't be too rigid. But what does matter is the things you're talking about. Eating real whole foods, no sugar, no added sugar. We're not talking about the sugar that naturally occurs in like a raspberry, but like the added sugar, avoiding seed oils, trying to at least limit, ideally eliminate alcohol, those kinds of things. But do you have the same conclusion just on, eat kind of the general plan you want, but make sure you follow these guidelines?
Yeah. We have to realize that the diet wars are a charade. Diet controversy is intended to confuse us so that as consumers, we're spinning our wheels and not sure what to eat and grasping for different solutions sold to us by marketers and the food industry. We are being distracted from what matters, which is that the vast majority of American calories and the foods that are being gavaged down kids' throats is pesticide-covered, plastic-filled, chemical-laden, science experiment food from a factory that is destroying our cellular health. So step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is to get off ultra-processed foods before even talking about a dietary philosophy. So that's number one. The second piece, and just look at the world. There are so many different traditional types of diets all over the world with different macronutrient compositions and different types of foods that people are eating. And we are designed as humans to have all these redundant pathways in our body that can use different types of foods to generate cellular health. But the common denominator between a carnivore diet that leads someone to improve their metabolic health and a vegan diet that leads someone to improve their metabolic health is real unprocessed clean food. So there's more commonalities than differences. So I just want to be very clear. The diet wars are a distraction from what matters, which is eating high quality, nutrient filled, non-chemically laden food. So we just that is the key point, is that many industries benefit off of our mass confusion about diet. And, there's another piece of the puzzle here, which I think is actually a really beautiful aspect of the world that we're living in right now and the technological advancements that have happened in science, which is that we have access to a lot of testing and biomarker lab work, things like that can actually tell us each if our diet is working for us. So right now, over 50% of Americans, when you survey them, they're completely confused about nutrition. They don't know what to eat and they feel paralyzed by all the choices and the different diet wars. But what people don't understand is that when we understand the basics of our foundational lab work, simple tests that any doctor can order, and we take some ownership and start really being the CEO of our health and not just fully outsourcing our health data to daddy doctor. When we start taking some more ownership over that, which the healthcare system has indoctrinated patients to believe that they are not smart enough to understand their lab work, which is incorrect. I think every fifth grader in America can understand their basic lab work and the physiology behind it. And that's why I lay it out in my book. Things like triglyceride levels, HDL cholesterol, fasting glucose levels, what does a blood pressure mean? These basic lab work. If we track those over time and we understand the basics about them, we can see whether the diet we're eating is generating metabolic health and is generating the conditions in our body that will help us avoid chronic disease. So the two key points here are eat unprocessed real food as local as possible. Ideally connect with farmers if you can, and check your biomarkers every 2 to 3 times a year, the basics. You don't need to do any fancy, expensive stuff that's covered by insurance, and track whether it's working for you. Right now, when we look at basic metabolic lab work, 93% of American adults are not getting a good mark for the basic 5 metabolic biomarkers, which is glucose, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, waist circumference, and blood pressure. 93.2% of Americans are not optimally managed on those biomarkers. So each of us needs to know those things for ourselves. And then as we engage in dietary strategies and try different things on, check routinely. And you can actually be very clear whether it's working for you or not. You don't have to be confused, and you don't have to outsource that information completely to your doctor.
It's amazing because I saw recently my cardiologist. I go once a year, and we were talking about how to make sure you maintain heart health. And he was saying, make sure you have a low in saturated fat diet. But we did not discuss any of this. We did not discuss any of this. None of this was raised by one of the best cardiologists in New York, which is obviously a big city. And what you are saying is it's really not about the amount of saturated fat in your diet. It's about what kind of foods are you taking in net on a 24 and 7 day a week basis. And if you're eating low in saturated fat, but you're eating high in processed foods and seed oils and a lot of sugar, you're probably still going to have unfavorable heart results.
Right. And I think that, we all are biochemically individual. So what really matters is the interaction between the saturated fat and your body, and then how that's actually leading to your health outcomes. And right now we can understand a lot about our health outcomes with the tools available to us. So the biomarker testing, we have all the wearables that we can wear now, like the Oura rings, and there's even continuous glucose monitors that can track that. And then there's also studies that we can do to actually see inside things like our heart vessels, like calcium scores or Clearly scans or carotid intimal thickness ultrasounds. There's tests that we can do to truly know what our risk is. And so I think there's a huge emergence really outside the healthcare system, more in the entrepreneurial world, to democratize access to this testing so that we don't have to walk around feeling confused, and we can have some more empowerment about understanding, the biomarkers that truly tell us about foundational cellular health and how this confluence of factors in our environment is interacting with our own bodies to generate health or not. And so
what does the Aura Ring show? You held up your finger. I've seen people wear this, but I haven't looked into it.
The Aura Ring, it's using essentially a light spectroscopy technology to understand some factors that are going on in your body. So it tells you about your resting heart rate, tells you about your sleep, so different stages of sleep, how much REM, deep sleep, light sleep you're getting, total time of sleep, total time in bed, which are often very different. It's telling you about your heart rate variability, which is a metric of basically how much time is between each heartbeat. And that's actually an objective measure of how much stress our bodies are under. It also tracks my temperature and pairs with an app called the Natural Cycles app, which is the only FDA approved form of birth control that's essentially a digital app. And so the temperature, I think this is astonishing, Megyn. I think most women, I didn't learn this until I was in my mid-30s, but you can actually track where you are in your hormonal cycle and your monthly cycle by just looking at your basal body temperature, which can be done through the ring. And so I have just learned so much about my own biology and my own cycle just by wearing an Aura Ring and then understanding how that relates to my monthly cycle. Wow. So I can know the exact day I'm ovulating. It can predict the exact day I'm going to get my period. And I just feel so much more in touch with that beautiful cyclical nature of my female body by having a ring that's telling me that. So, resting heart rate, that's a really important biomarker because the lower our resting heart rate is, sort of the better our cardiac outcomes will be, the less stress the heart is under to be, pumping blood. So that's something you can see from the ring. And I really want to see my resting heart rate be in that like high 40s, low 50s. Wow. The Mayo Clinic says 60 to 100 is fine, but we actually know that as we get up closer to a resting heart rate of 100 beats per minute, it portends much worse health outcomes than if we're in that lower range. And so it lets you just zoom in on kind of day-to-day what's happening with these inputs, like how much sleep am I getting and how much movement am I getting? It also tracks your steps, of course. And so you can stay accountable to the key metabolic inputs that we know have an impact on our health outcomes. So
you talk about the continuous glucose monitor too, which you said, the book goes through in detail how this will help you monitor your life and how well you're doing and the glucose in your body and the insulin and all that. But I don't understand. Is this something like, does it puncture you? Like how does it work?
Yeah, so it's a sensor that you wear on the back of your arm, and it does have a small little probe that's 4 millimeters long. It's like fishing wire. It's very small. You can't feel it, and that does puncture the skin. So this little probe is essentially sitting in the fluid around your cells in your arm, and it's constantly sampling your blood sugar levels and sending that information to your smartphone so you can see in real time what's happening to your blood sugar levels. And your blood sugar levels matter because as we become metabolically dysfunctional, we sort of have this problem in the body with how the body's making energy, how the mitochondria are converting food to energy in our bodies, what's going to happen? And as I mentioned, that problem is happening not just because of the food we're eating, but also because of the lack of sleep and the lack of movement and the environmental toxins that's all synergistically destroying our cellular health. What's going to happen when we become metabolically dysfunctional is the cells are actually going to reject glucose, sugar, from coming into the cells because they can't do a good job of processing it anymore because the cell is essentially metabolically broken. So our blood sugar levels are going to rise in the bloodstream because it's not being able to be taken out of the bloodstream into the cells. So because metabolic dysfunction is affecting 93% of Americans today, tracking your blood sugar can give you this basically constant movie of what's happening with this key metabolic biomarker. So when you have breakfast, you can look and instantly see how did that breakfast affect your blood sugar? And then you might be able to make some tweaks. Okay, well, I had oatmeal and my blood sugar went up 100 points, which is very, very high. Maybe tomorrow I'll add a little bit of fiber. I'll add some fat. I'll add some protein. I'll take a walk after breakfast to try and minimize that huge blood sugar rise that I had after that meal. So it lets you have this closed loop feedback between what you're eating, how your sleep is, what exercises you're doing, and what's actually happening with your blood sugar, this key metabolic biomarkers.
I want to tell the audience that there are so many helpful tips in the book. Again, it's called Good Energy by Casey Means, MD. Like, take a 15-minute walk after your meals. That actually helps with the insulin and the glucose levels. When you're eating a meal, let's face it, people are not going to give up carbs. They're not going to give up pasta permanently or rice or all that. But there's a way of eating your meal where if you have, Casey writes, like a handful of almonds maybe before you go out, have a little bit of fat, and maybe when you eat your meal, you have that salad first, and then you eat your protein first, and then you finish up maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes after that with the starchy thing like your potato or your pasta, even that can help you keep these glucose and these insulin levels managed. So you're not totally unrealistic. Like, we're just never going to have pasta again. We're just, people realistically won't live like that. But there are these little tips where you can live like a normal person, but minimize the damage that you have been doing.
That's exactly right. And I think everyone's had the experience where they've had a post-meal crash, where you have a meal and then a little bit later you feel exhausted and you want to take a nap and, are feeling tired. And what's so interesting with something like a continuous glucose monitor is you can actually see what's happening in your body when you have that subjective experience of a crash. And often what's happening is that we've skyrocketed our blood sugar levels with probably refined sugars, refined carbs, not a balanced meal. And then the body sees that huge blood sugar spike and wants to lower it because it doesn't like that. Big blood sugar spikes can lead to problems like inflammation and sugar sticking to things in the body, which is not good. That's called glycation. So the body releases all this insulin to soak up all that glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells. And sometimes it will overshoot and you will crash and you'll see your blood sugar actually going beneath your baseline pre-meal. That is often when people feel tired, low energy, jittery, have more cravings for carbohydrates because the body really wants to get the blood sugar back up to baseline. And so it drives you to want carbohydrates. So I think for many people, when we're eating the standard American diet, we're on this blood sugar roller coaster all day long. We're up, down, and then we have to compensate to get back up. So we eat some carbs and then we're up and down. And what's just amazing when you're using tools like this is that you can really see that as you stabilize your blood sugar with simple tweaks, like what you were just talking about, pairing carbohydrates with protein and fiber, taking walks after meals, getting better sleep, managing your stress better, our day actually feels a lot more stable, like subjectively, like our mood and our mental health and our sense of ability to focus and our energy and things like that. That's not to say that people need this technology to reap the benefits of what you can learn from it. There's lots of principles like the ones we just talked about that anyone can apply to the way they craft a meal with or without a sensor, and still get the benefits of more blood sugar stability. But it's cool that you can see
if you want it. The information's right there. Yeah. You don't have to move into Casey's house. You can have some of this information feedback in your own house for, relatively inexpensive price. All right, there's so much I want to get to in the half an hour we have left. Can you explain quickly seed oils? Because Dr. Kate Shanahan, she came on the show. They are the Hateful Eight: canola, soybean, corn, sunflower, safflower, grapeseed, rice bran, and cottonseed oils. Good oils would include avocado, coconut. What else?
Olive oil, coconut, avocado,
olive.
And then things like ghee and beef tallow. Duck fat, things like that, things that are much more natural and have been less refined things. These are fats that our bodies have evolved to eat over millennia. The issue with seed oils, which is one of the most controversial topics right now in the world, for whether they're healthy or not, I think you've got to back up a little bit and realize a couple things. One, that this is now the predominant source of calories in the American diet is these seed oils that are in everything. They are in every processed food. They're in salad dressing. So hard
to find food without
marinades. Them. You can barely go to Whole Foods and find a food without seed oils anymore.
Oh, I was complaining last Friday. I had on Dr. Martin McCary, and I was saying, okay, we want to get nuts, just healthy nuts for the kids to snack on, right? So you go, good luck finding a nut. The only ones you can find is maybe pistachios and macadamia nuts that haven't been treated with canola oil. And the kids, they don't want the raw nuts. They want something that's been like a little like flavored. But I have been able to find macadamia nuts and pistachios that say ingredients, nuts and salt. That's it. But everything else, canola.
Always. And it's devastating to see like what's even happened to Whole Foods. The integrity and the standards of what they used to consider healthy have slipped so much, where 9 of the 10 things I pick up at a Whole Foods these days have too much sugar, seed oils, or they're not organic. So it's unfortunate. But so these seed oils have burst onto the scene, and many of them were actually created in the wake of Rockefeller's work with oil refining, as essentially they needed something to do with some of the byproducts of the oil refining. And so in a sense, we're kind of eating like an engine lubricant when we eat these seed oils. And they are not foods that we had 150, 200 years ago. They're brand new, and they're highly concentrated and rich for omega-6 fats, which are pro-inflammatory. They get incorporated rapidly into our cell membranes and have an impact on how our cells function. They outcompete other healthier forms of fat for places in our cell membrane. So they're actually changing really the structural integrity of our body. And I think, we have to take into account the fact that these are generally stored in clear plastic bottles, that plastic can, anything that's stored in a thin plastic bottle, like a vegetable oil or canola oil, can have those microplastics leaching into it. You often see avocado oil or olive oil in a glass bottle, but these seed oils are almost always in a plastic bottle. Clear plastic bottles, so that light is getting in, it's oxidizing the oils so that can make them more damaging. And they're just the majority of fats we're eating, and they're devoid of really any nutritional value. I think if you really want to lose your lunch, you should Google a video of how canola oil is made. How is olive oil or avocado?
We did it because I heard you say that. And so we have at least one. Here is a little look at how they make it. The very natural canola oil. Watch.
It's the flakes into a screw press. It has a large revolving screw-shaped shaft enclosed within a slotted cage. As the shaft turns, its threads squeeze the flakes with high pressure, forcing out the oil, which then drains out through the slots. A 70-minute wash with a solvent. This chemical extraction process removes all but a trace of oil. So the next step is to cool the oil to 5 degrees Celsius. This thickens those waxes so they can be filtered out. The waxes don't go to waste either.
Gross.
The factory uses them to produce vegetable shortening. After washing and filtering the oil, they bleach it to lighten the color, then use a steam injection heating process to remove the canola odor. The oil is now fully refined and ready for bottling.
For the listening audience, it looks like they put that through a car engine. That's really what it reminded me of. Putting it through a car engine and then feeding it to you.
I don't want that in my body. And then on top of that, you do have to think about the bigger picture environmental impact, because these are, again, taxpayer-funded commodity crops that are covered in glyphosate and pesticides, which are hormone disruptors. And so you're essentially, by buying that oil and using it, we're also promoting a system that's driving this monoculture that's destroying the soil in our country and will probably lead to some type of food collapse in the future because of what we're doing to our soil. And so much of that land is being used to grow this stuff that's just going into seed oils. It takes I'm just
having my aha moment here on how kids are going into early puberty and the sperm count is going down and girls are having PCOS more than ever. Even if you have a household that's feeding them vegetables and fruits, unless you're eliminating seed oils, they're getting the pesticides that you just listed, that glucosidase, whatever it is. That way, they're coming in through what's in your pantry. And this stuff could be leading to a lot of that, no?
There's three things that we really need to be thinking about when we're talking about hormone disruption that is rampant right now. Like you said, a devastating statistic is that early onset puberty is now becoming epidemic in our country. American girls are starting puberty years earlier than any other continent in the world. And it has declined about 6 years, the onset of puberty in the past 100 years. And we're also seeing a huge rise in hormone-driven cancers, like breast cancer, which is an estrogen-driven cancer. On top of that, we're seeing a sustained decline in sperm count and a sustained decline in total fertility rate, and women's infertility, the leading cause of which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, is skyrocketing. So across the hormonal spectrum, we are being destroyed and devastated. I'm 36 years old. I cannot have a conversation with friends in my age group without the topic of infertility or IVF or egg freezing coming up. So we have to back up and say, what the hell is going on? Two of the big factors I think we need to be investigating are both pesticides and plastics. So, plastic is everywhere. Plastic is ubiquitous. It's literally in every single thing. Our sheets are made of polyester. Our clothes are made of polyester. Every bottle in our home is made of plastic. All our food containers are plastic. Plastics are now in our air, nanoparticularized plastics in our air. It's in our water supply. It's on our food. It's in our homes. We're covered in it. And plastics and pesticides can disrupt estrogen receptor signaling, act as xenoestrogens, which essentially create a pro-estrogenic environment in our bodies. And other pesticides like atrazine, which is illegal overseas, but which we use about 70 million pounds of in our country each year, can actually convert testosterone to estrogen. And so, just as a real wake-up call to people, we talk about, does organic matter? It's like these chemicals that are invisible and are on our food can convert testosterone to estrogen. So why would we not be worried about that when all of these hormone-related issues are skyrocketing in our culture? So one of the easiest things that I think we can do to clean things up is to just, we got to filter our water. We should avoid pesticides on our foods, and we should really try and minimize the amount of plastic that's in our homes and on our foods and things like that.
So I have a question for you from Debbie Murphy, who is my executive producer for news. She's been with me forever. And she has a question I think a lot of moms want to know about, which is, okay, you get the non-pesticide laden fruits and veggies into your house, and then you send your kid off to school and you put it in the little plastic baggie. And your alternative, if you don't want to put it in the little plastic baggie to send your kid to school with it, is to try to put it in glass, which is heavy, and the little kid could break it, and the school doesn't love it. And so I think a lot of us struggle with that. Like, you may have this good, clean food, and then you shove it in plastic or you shove it in Reynolds wrap. And it's like, that's aluminum. Same thing with bottled water. You have it in plastic. Or, what, is the aluminum any healthier? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. We want to avoid the aluminum too, because aluminum is a neurotoxin that's, filling the vaccines that we're using. And that's in, we're drinking these aluminum cans that are also lined with plastic. So we're getting both plastic and aluminum. It's everywhere. Oh. I think it comes back to, we don't want to get discouraged. I think one of the things that always keeps me hopeful is realizing that all of this is just a few decades old. We have forgotten that, but we actually got into this mess just over the course of half a century. So we can absolutely get ourselves out of it, but we do need to wake up and realize what's happening and think about our priorities, right? We need to get creative. We need all hands on deck. We need our brains to be functioning properly so that we can address these issues that are, all of this is slipping into culture because of industry interests, and we're kind of allowing it to happen, but we have a lot of agency. And I think we really need to, like I talked about earlier, get back in touch before solutions, before talking about what's better than a plastic baggie or a Reynolds wrap. We need to get back to the basics, which is more spiritual, I think, which is the fact that what do we want from this lifetime? What do we even think about this lifetime? Are we connecting with our spirituality and the fact that we are having this absolutely miraculous cosmic experience as spirits in a body for 70 to 90 years on this planet once in eternity? What are our priorities, And then if we ground in that, whether that's a spiritual belief or a religious belief, and really invest in that and just kind of unplug a little bit from this distraction industrial tech complex that wants us to totally forget about the miraculousness of the experience of life. Once we do unplug from that, then think about, okay, what do I want to do in this lifetime? What is my purpose? Where am I trying to get? And I think realizing that the temple of the body, which is impacted by all of these things we're talking about, this is our gateway to reaching our highest purpose, to connecting with God during this lifetime. And I say all that not to take us off topic, but because we get really caught up in how difficult all the micro decisions are around our lives and how tough it is with the schools and the school lunches and the baggies and the lotions have artificial fragrances in them and the plastics. But I think we got to ground this in the real core truth, which is that, we're off course as a culture. Our priorities are misaligned. We're missing what matters. We are totally distracted by tech and by all of this environmental stuff destroying our biology and making us not think clearly. We got to get back on track. From that place, then we can talk about solutions, which is I want to invest my time and in sourcing healthy food and in trying to find alternatives. So that might be a silicone baggie. I don't know. It might be, wrapping your kid's sandwich in butcher paper rather than a plastic baggie. But I think, there's certainly infinite solutions to kind of piece through each of these, filter our water, this and that. But fundamentally, I just think it needs to be grounded in a sense of not overwhelmed, but actually I'm committed to prioritizing this in my life because I am disgusted
one-day decisions.
By how culture's going.
I'm going to get a water filter on at least my kitchen sink. And then you do it, and then you're done with that one. Some of it is just I'm going to do some planning to improve my life. I want to say a couple of things because I just want to get these out because I know our time is short and you have to catch a flight. Okay. So we should spend a minute on sugar. Sugar's the devil.
Yeah.
I just did the thing. I did a Google search and found out that my kids are allowed to have 25 grams of sugar a day, according to the recommendations. So I thought, that's not so bad. You could have like one ice cream a day. Your position is it's zero. It's zero. Hello. The sugar is terrible for us. So I want to go back to that. But just a couple other things quickly. We do need to be exercising. Walking is great throughout the day. Not one exercise, not 1 hour, not sit at a desk all day and then do 1 hour of exercise. All day long, little movements, wall sits, mini little squats. Even if it's 1 minute or 2 minutes an hour, that's actually better for you than just the 1 hour and 8 hours of sitting. And actually, you cite somebody in there. I think I can't remember who it is, but in any event, it's saying, in fact, if you sit all day and then you just do that 1 hour of exercise, you're probably undoing the effects of that 1 hour of exercise by all that sitting. Sitting is the devil. Sitting is death. You will die if you sit all day. So that's one thing. And the other weird thing, I'm just jumping around so I can get these things out while you're still here, see which one you want to talk about, is the hot and cold therapy is good. Like saunas are good. Cold plunges are good. You don't have to have necessarily a cold plunge to do it. You can just turn on the cold shower for 2 minutes at the end. All that stuff is like testing your body. And sleep. This is in your book, and we've had other sleep experts on, but it matters. It matters. Get at least 7 hours. And here's the weirdest but most interesting thing that jumped out at me in this whole thing. Do not take your grocery store receipts. Say, I don't want my receipt. Okay, so take your pick out of all those, but those are just quick rules for the audience listening at home.
Yeah, those are the keys. And, as you read the book, you realize that all of these things are basically doing the same thing. When we sleep and we avoid the toxins and we move more throughout the day, what we're doing is we're giving our bodies signals to help mitochondria and our cells do their best work. So it all funnels through this core foundational pathway that lets us have just foundational health. And these are, of course, didn't learn any of these things in medical school. Had to learn all of this after medical school. And so, yes, absolutely. I think that it is helpful to talk a little bit about the walking that you were talking about, because I think this is very free and practical and actionable for people. What the research shows that if we're able to move a little bit every hour throughout the day, so just get up and walk around the block or walk around our house, do a few air squats, just move our muscles. What that does is it actually keeps our glucose channels, our blood sugar channels on our cell membrane all throughout the day so that we're constantly able to take blood sugar out of the bloodstream and use it. If we sit all day and just exercise for 1 hour during the day, we're actually keeping those glucose channels inside the cell for most of the day and keeping that blood sugar floating around the bloodstream. And so it's a very different physiology if we're just, doing these little micro hits of movement all throughout the day versus sitting all day and then exercising for an hour. Of course, that hour has a huge benefit and it's great for your mitochondrial health and your aerobic health. But what we want to do is we want to be exercising, but also sprinkling little 2-minute bursts of motion throughout the day to keep those cells constantly metabolically active. So this is the simple stuff like park farther away from the store when you're in the parking lot so you can walk a little bit farther, setting those little alarms on your phone for every 45 minutes or an hour to remind you to get up and move. It actually has a monumental impact on our 24-hour blood sugar levels.
One of the things you recommend is the treadmill desk, which I said to the team, I'm like, what is this treadmill desk? Can you guys get me a videotape of it? And 3 of the members of my staff said we all have them. Here's Debbie Murphy. Yeah. This is Canadian Debbie. For those of you listening at home, you know her well. She's been with me since 2007 at Fox. And here she is up in Canada. Boo, Canada. Walking on her treadmill. This is Kelly McGuire. Here we go. Another Canadian producer. All my staff is in Canada. I don't know why. Okay, this is Natasha. She produced this segment. Casey, there's your book. So she's not in Canada. She's down in Texas. But anyway, 3 of my staff are actually reading and writing and doing real work on the treadmill desks.
Yeah. Pretty much the only thing I do sitting indoors is podcasts because it's a much better environment and I've got the good background. But to my right now is my treadmill desk. I have a bright pink treadmill desk. This desk will raise after the podcast. And I actually have a standing desk outside. I'm pointing to my glass sliding door right now, just an old desk that I have a little structure on top of so I can stand. And I move my treadmill desk indoors and outdoors throughout the day. And that gets to another point about metabolic health that I think is sort of under the radar, which is we need to be spending more time outside, astronomically more time outside.
This is big.
The research on this is insane. Humans are spending about 94% of their time inside a house or inside a car, only about 6% of their time outdoors on this spectacular, beautiful planet that we have this privilege to live on. And this has yeah, I know. I mean, it's so my invitation for people is try to find things that you are doing right now, indoor and seated during the day, and just find a way to do some of them outside, and ideally some of them outside and standing. So this could be, instead of catching up with your partner on the couch at the end of the day, take a walk around the block together. If you are opening your mail that you just got from your mailbox, instead of bringing it inside and sitting to look at the mail, maybe stand outside at a table and do it. The reason for this is multifactorial. The first is that our circadian rhythms are being destroyed in our modern culture, where we're being blasted with blue light from the screens, and we're spending 94% of our time indoors separated from sunlight. Sunlight is a form of energy that actually hits our cells in our retina and on our skin and tells our body what time it is. It tells our body that it's daytime, and in the absence of light energy, it tells our body it's nighttime. That's important because we're diurnal animals. We do certain biological activity during the day, and we do certain biological activity at night. And in our modern world, where we're separated from sunlight all day and we're blasting our retinas with blue light at night, our bodies are completely confused about what to do during different times of the day. And again, the chronic disease epidemic is basically mass confusion of our cells, and circadian biology is a big part of that. And the way we can actually fix that is spending more time exposing our retina without sunglasses. You don't want to look straight at the sun, but you want to just be outside with the sunlight. Even if it's cloudy, that's fine. There's still photons coming through. And you want your skin and your retina to basically see what time of day it is so it knows what genetic and cell signaling pathways to do. And then at night, of course, once the sun goes down and different pathways need to be activated in our body for biology, we want to basically separate from all that blasting light. So dim lights, maybe use the blue light blocking glasses, turn your devices onto dark mode, or put a red light filter on your computer. You want to reduce that blue light blasting your retinas. And all of this is to help your body know what time it is so it can do the biological activity it's supposed to. So the second piece, aside from circadian biology about going outdoors, it's so important, is that the air is actually cleaner outside than it is inside our homes. Our home air is actually usually more polluted than what it would be outside. There's some exceptions to this, like if you live right next to a big highway, but typically because of all the carpeting and the paint and the plastics and the dust in our homes, it's actually more polluted. And air pollution is a huge cause of why we're sick. So just get outside, spend more time breathing fresh air. And of course, the third piece gets back to the spiritual. When we go outside, we get away from our myopic tunnel vision that happens when we're locked inside these cages of our four walls of our, offices. And we see that there's a bigger picture. We see that there is beautiful nature doing its thing out there. We see that there's stars and moon and sun in the sky. We see that there are birds flying around, and we realize that this is all bigger than us. And we need to actually realize that we're interconnected to everything else on planet Earth and in the universe, and have more awe for that. And so for multiple, and that actually, and that sounds a little bit, woo-woo, but in reality, there is research that shows that when you spend time around trees and when you spend time outdoors, it significantly lowers our stress hormone levels, which have an impact on our metabolic health. So circadian biology, unpolluted, less polluted air, and lowering our cortisol levels are all reasons that just spending more time outdoors can transform our health. And when we sit inside at our desks, on our computers, on our phones, we get scared, we get small, we think the world is a terrible place because that's all we're seeing. So that's why it matters.
Let me ask you a couple quick ones, okay? Because we only have a couple of minutes left. I'd love to get these answers. Why shouldn't we take our grocery store receipt?
So the thermal ink on receipts actually is an endocrine disrupting chemical, and can actually affect our hormone health. And so we don't want to touch our receipts. Yeah. And that thermal ink we should just not touch. So just decline the receipt or ask for an electronic receipt.
Brilliant. Got it. Bottled water?
Avoid bottled water from a plastic bottle. These are filled with nanoparticles of microplastic, which again can have estrogenic effects. And actually, we now know that plastics in our, that are in these bottled waters and they actually can go into our cells, these nanoparticles, and disturb our mitochondrial function by actually going inside our cells. One thing that I think is astonishing that is not being talked about yet by doctors is the fact that the ubiquity of plastic in our air, water, food, and homes, which is an invention that was only created 100 years ago, brand new, it's changing the way we're going to have to practice medicine, because now coronary plaques, like the plaques that block our arteries that go from our heart to our brain, we can do a surgery called a carotid endarterectomy to take out those plaques. And they're looking at those plaques under a microscope now. And 55% of plaques are now filled with microplastics. So we not only have...
too much of a bummer, because I feel so powerless over the plastics. Sorry to cut you off, but we have got 60 seconds left and I got to get these out. If you get a filter on your kitchen sink, do you need one on your shower?
Probably it would be good. I don't have one yet. There's kind of just too many things to do, but there are shower filters now. And, I think that might be a beneficial thing to do, or a whole house filter if you can, but certainly
when you
for
drink
your drinking
your water, what do you buy? If you buy one of those reusable, I take it you don't get a plastic. What material do you get a bottle of water, like a thermos in?
I use a stainless steel or a glass water bottle. I carry multiple with me all the time, so I have enough water. Usually I'm carrying 2 liters at a time, and I have a reverse osmosis filter that gets remineralized, and that's under my sink. So, I even will check bags now instead of taking carry-ons, so I can bring 3 or 4 liters of water with me on a trip, just so I can have something to start with when I get there. But otherwise, a glass bottle would be your best option, like spring water.
Okay, so we ended it on a very small myopic note and we started on big notes, but that's fine because people do need practical advice for what to do, including yours truly. Please come back. We've only scratched the surface. There's so much goodness in here. Casey, thank you.
Thank you, Megyn, so much for being a warrior on this health issue. I so appreciate what you're doing.
I am 100% with you. And I should tell the audience, Nicole Shanahan's going to be on this show soon. Here's the book, Good Energy. Go buy it by Casey Means. Get it now. God bless you, Casey, and your brother, Callie, as well. Thanks again for being here. We'll be back on Monday with the EJs. We'll see all of you then.